Tensions in the Baltics have just escalated to the next level. Russia has started to retaliate against the interception of ships from its so-called ghost fleet, right where the Baltic republics are most vulnerable, their trade routes.
Tensions in the Baltic Sea. Russia detains oil tanker that left Estonian port. Russia is deliberately stoking tensions and taking revenge on Estonia for its earlier actions. There are ways to prevent these kinds of incidents in the future, and our Estonian colleagues are now considering how to redirect shipping routes to avoid Russian territorial waters. This is a shared problem.
Just a few days ago, on May 18th, Russia stopped a Greek oil tanker that was passing through Russian territorial waters on a previously agreed route. The ship was carrying Estonian shale oil and had departed from the port of Sillamäe, headed for Rotterdam in the Netherlands. Well, according to Estonia's Transport Administration, the tanker had been following a long-term route that had been coordinated with Russia. This was a route that, until now, was considered safe for large vessels navigating the shallow coastal waters off Estonia. So what's the issue here? This move basically threw that agreement out the window. The detention of the tanker was a direct response to an incident a few days earlier involving an old tanker flying the flag of Gabon, suspected to be part of Russia's Ghost Fleet, and an operation by the Estonian Navy that tried to intercept it. But this wasn't the only provocation the land of the espresso macchiato has faced recently. In fact, in Estonia, they could be facing a pretty tense and dangerous security situation with Russia. What exactly are we talking about? Well, in this video, we're going to break it all down for you, so let's get into it. Earlier this month, on May 9th, there was another incident of a different kind, just a few kilometers from Sillamäe, in the Estonian city of Narva, right on the border with Russia. As you probably know, May 9th is when Russia celebrates Victory Day, the Soviet triumph over the Nazis, on Red Square in Moscow. But what if I told you that on that very same day, Russia used the occasion to provoke Estonia with an event right on their shared border? Take a look at this news story.
Russia stages Victory Day concert facing Estonian border town.
Yes, once again this year, Russia decided to provoke Estonia with a patriotic concert set up right on the edge of the border, perfectly visible and audible to the residents of Narva. The Russians have been doing this ever since 2023, when Estonia banned any event that glorifies the Soviet Union, following the invasion of Ukraine. Now, why is this important? Well, here's the thing. Between 85 and 90% of Narva's population is ethnically Russian. And in fact, 96% of all the people living in this city speak Russian as their first language. And you already know how Putin's nationalist doctrine works. According to it, any ethnic Russian should be protected by the so-called motherland Russia. At least that's what they claim. The reality, of course, is far from that. Just look at the thousands of ethnic Russians in Ukraine who've been killed under Putin's orders since the invasion began. But that's another story. The point is, this border, the one separating Ivangorod and Narva, is considered one of the most sensitive and tense flashpoints between Russia and NATO countries. Why? Well, partly because of the demographics we just talked about, but also, take a look at this. The river you're looking at, just a few meters wide at its narrowest point, is all that separates Putin's Russia from Estonia and NATO. On the left, you've got Herman Castle in Estonia. On the right, the Ivangorod Fortress in Russia. It's the perfect spot to stage any kind of provocation, because, as you probably know, both the Estonian government and its society are strongly pro-Ukraine. And I mean very pro-Ukraine. Just to give you an idea, Estonia is, relative to its GDP, the country that has sent the most aid to Ukraine. We're talking about 2.6% of its GDP since the invasion began, according to data from the Kiel Institute. To put that into perspective, for Spain to match that level, it would have to multiply its current aid to Kyiv by more than 6.5 times. And for the US to do the same, it would need to cough up an additional $600 billion. That's 5 times what it's given so far. That's the scale of Estonia's effort. But here's the thing, just over 200 kilometers east of Tallinn in Narva, things look a little different. In this city of about 53,300 people, Estonia's third largest, 36% of the population holds Russian citizenship. And even today, many of them still cross the border into Russia on foot on a regular basis. Then they return because they have residency in Estonia. For now, there haven't been any major issues. People in the city mostly prefer to stay quiet. But here's where the concern lies for both the Estonian government and NATO as a whole. They fear that Russia might try to do the same thing it did in Georgia or in Ukraine. occupy Narva under the pretext of protecting its own people. Under what's known as the Karaganov Doctrine, they could claim that ethnic Russians in Estonia are facing persecution, some kind of apartheid or discrimination. And VisualPolitik community, that's what makes this one of the hottest, most dangerous borders in the entire European Union. Which is precisely why we shouldn't be surprised when we come across headlines like this.
Estonian government approves additional funding to raise defense spending to 5.4% of GDP.
Exactly, Estonia is following in Poland's footsteps, and it plans to increase its defense spending to over 5% of GDP by 2029. And I know what many of you are probably thinking, but is that really necessary? Is the Russian threat really that obvious to them? Well, the truth is, it's more obvious than you might think. At first glance, the Estonian-Russian border seems calm, even peaceful, but the real threat and the underlying tension aren't something you can see that easily. In fact, given all the recent developments over the past few months, Estonia has plenty of reasons to be concerned. So what kind of Russian movements are we talking about here? Is a Russian attack on Estonia actually imminent? And how exactly are the Estonians getting ready to face a possible act of aggression from Moscow? Well, all of that and more we're about to break down for you right now. Stay tuned.
In the crosshairs.
Many European intelligence services, along with military analysts, are sounding the alarm. Russia may be preparing for a conflict with NATO.
German intel warns Russia could attack NATO country in near future, reports.
Now, just to be clear, we're not talking about an immediate conflict. What experts are warning about is something that could happen later this decade. First, Moscow would need to bring its brutal invasion of Ukraine to an end. And even then, it's not expected to be an all-out, full-scale war. What's more likely is a series of aggressive hybrid warfare tactics, or at most, a limited contained incursion into NATO territory designed to cause instability. And when it comes to that scenario, most eyes are focused on the very place we just talked about, Narva in Estonia. So why Narva? Well, aside from the large ethnic Russian community and the significant number of Russian citizens living there, Narva is right next to the Leningrad military district. This is a military district that already existed back in the Soviet Union, but was later split in two. Last year, Putin restored this military district by merging it with the Northern Fleet's district. Now, if Russia invades Narva, Moscow's troops would have a clear path, with no natural obstacles, both through the north and south of Estonia. By holding Narva, Russia could threaten Estonia not only from Narva itself, but also from the Russian city of Pskov in the south, making Estonia much more vulnerable to Russian pressure. Keep in mind, Narva is separated from Russia by the Narva River, which acts as a natural border. Then, further south, there's Lake Peipus, which separates central Estonia from Russia. But in the south of the country, the Estonian-Russian border is land-based, with no natural barriers other than dense forests. So if you think what we're describing isn't already a source of tension, take a look at this. In the past year alone, Russia has carried out direct actions on or near the Estonian border. Let me give you two examples, starting with the waters that form the natural boundary between the two countries.
Russia is trying to push river borders.
You see, Estonia has been placing buoys along the Narva River for years to mark the river border with Russia. The idea is to prevent anyone navigating the Narva from accidentally drifting into Russian waters. Now, here's the thing. Each year, the positions of these buoys are reviewed, since the riverbed can shift during the cold months and potentially move the natural boundary. That's why the buoys are removed and reinstalled each summer. And what do you think happened? Well, in 2023, Russia suddenly decided it no longer agreed with the placement of some of those buoys, despite having approved their locations with Estonia just a year earlier. Then, in 2024, they took matters into their own hands. In the early hours of May 23, 2024, Russian border guards unilaterally removed 24 of these buoys. To do that, they had to enter Estonian territory, because the buoys are installed within Estonian waters, which is a serious violation of the border. But honestly, what we're telling you here is just a footnote compared to the much bigger threat that could unfold around Estonia in the years ahead. For months now, intelligence analysts have been detecting signs that Russia is building up and reinforcing its military infrastructure near NATO's eastern flank, right along the borders with Finland and Estonia. We're talking about the modernization of barracks, railway construction, weapon stockpiles. For example, just 60 kilometers from the Finnish border, in the Russian village of Kamenka, 130 military tents have been set up since February, enough to house around 2,000 soldiers. And just 175 kilometers from the Finnish border, in Petrozavodsk, Russia is working to turn this small city in one of the new army headquarters. Further north, within the Arctic Circle, They're renovating the old Severomorsk II airbase. All of this, as you might expect, is part of the Kremlin's broader reinforcement strategy, along what is now Russia's new border with NATO, thanks to Finland's accession. That said, despite all this build-up, many experts doubt that Finland would be Russia's next target, and there are three main reasons for that. First, Finland has a relatively large and very well-equipped military. In fact, it's the largest artillery force in Europe. On top of that, Finland is a wealthy country, which means it could afford the costs of war and hold out in a prolonged conflict. Second, it's incredibly difficult to advance quickly into Finland because the country is covered with dense forests and lakes, and any invading force would be met with a barrage of artillery fire. And third, let's not forget, since 2023, Finland is now a full-fledged member of NATO. All this has led some to believe that the real focus of this military build-up in the Leningrad district may not be Finland at all, but rather Estonia. And without a doubt, in Tallinn, they have more than enough reasons to be concerned and to prepare for whatever may come. But the concerns in Tallinn don't just stem from Russia's military strengthening just a day's march from the border. No, Estonia is also deeply worried about other kinds of threats, like this one.
Russia plans to turn Belarus into launching pad for intermediate-range ballistic missiles.
You see, ever since Russia's invasion of Ukraine began, we all know that Moscow has been moving some of its nuclear warheads into Belarus. But over the past few months, the Kremlin has also been getting even closer to Minsk to expand its ballistic missile arsenal on Belarusian territory. Back in December, Putin and Lukashenko agreed to deploy Oreshnik hypersonic ballistic missiles in Belarus during the second half of 2025. Missiles that have enough range to strike Estonia in under 4 minutes. Their plan is to position between 8 and 12 launch systems in remote areas of Belarus so they can't be easily destroyed by systems like ATACMS. In other words, in the event of a conflict with NATO, these launchers wouldn't be within reach of missiles fired from platforms like HIMARS. But that's not all. On top of that, Russia and Belarus have also built 2 new hangars in Osipovichi since June 2024. These hangars will house new Iskander-M missiles. Missiles that, as many of you might remember, are capable of carrying nuclear warheads. And yes, they're also within striking range of Estonia. Now do you understand why Tallinn is on high alert, and why Estonia is set to push its military spending above 5%? Still, I know what many of you are probably wondering. Why Estonia? Why not Latvia or Lithuania? Well, look, Russia could technically launch a military action in any of these 3. Nothing's off the table, and all of them have plenty of reasons to stay alert. But Estonia does stand out for a couple of reasons. First, about 24% of Estonia's population is ethnically Russian. That's similar to Latvia, but much higher than Lithuania's 5%. And in a worst-case scenario, this could be used as a scapegoat, just like it was in Ukraine. The second reason, what sets Estonia apart from Latvia, is its geographic location.
While Latvia could potentially be supported militarily from both the north via Estonia and Finland, and the south through Lithuania and Poland, Estonia only shares a land border with one ally, Latvia. This means that with the right military planning, Estonia could be largely isolated by Russia, creating a scenario where Moscow could prepare an incursion in the north, across the river, targeting Narva.
Hold on, we're about to tell you something that could dramatically change that situation. Now, to be clear, a Russian attack, or even a limited invasion of Estonia, isn't likely to happen tomorrow, next month, or even this year. That's according to Estonia's own intelligence services, and hopefully it never happens at all. Still, the possibility is very real. Russia's medium-term threat looms, and in the coming years, it could turn into a harsh reality, which is why Estonia knows it needs to be ready. So what do you think Estonia is doing? Exactly, they're preparing for the worst. And how? Well, that's exactly what we're going to show you now. Pay close attention.
Preparing for war.
When a country wants to get ready for war, what's the first thing they usually do? That's right, buy weapons. Lots of weapons. And that's exactly what Estonia is doing. Their top priority is ammunition and more weapon systems. In fact, the Ministry of Defense has laid out a procurement plan starting this year, 2025, and running through 2028, with up to $5.3 billion earmarked to buy everything. Over $1.5 billion are just for ammunition. Things like 155mm artillery shells, anti-tank munitions like the Javelin, ammo for combat vehicles, self-propelled howitzers, multiple rocket launchers like HIMARS, and in fact, they just received their first 6 HIMARS launchers barely a month ago at the end of April.
6 HIMARS. Multiple launch rocket systems arrive in Estonia. The acquisition of 6 HIMARS systems is one of Estonia's largest ever arms procurements.
But don't think that's where it ends. From Tallinn, they're also actively looking into other options to strengthen their air defense, specifically against potential missile threats from both Russia and Belarus.
Estonia to procure long-range missile defense system, evaluating Patriot, David Sling, and SAMP/T options.
In the end, keep in mind that Estonia's armed forces are primarily focused on ground troops. Sure, they have a few naval vessels, but those are mainly used for mine-clearing operations in the Baltic Sea, and when it comes to combat aircraft, their air force is practically non-existent. They rely almost entirely on NATO's Baltic air policing mission to protect their skies. Remember, we're talking about a country with just 1.3 million people. That's even less than the population of a city like Barcelona or San Diego. So buying and maintaining a fleet of fighter jets, that would be absolutely insane. That's why Estonia has made a very clear decision to focus on two things: air defense systems to protect the skies and a well-equipped, highly functional land force. And honestly, that makes perfect sense when you consider all the threats we've just gone over. Let me give you a concrete example. Take a look at this. This is the layout of what's known as the Baltic Defense Line. It's a series of physical barriers designed to protect the borders of all 3 Baltic states, and it's expected to cost around $500 million. Modeled after Poland's Eastern Shield project, the Baltic version will feature anti-tank and anti-personnel mines, dragon's teeth, barbed wire, and much more. And that's not all. The Baltic countries are also planning to spend around 60 million euros to build 600 bunkers along their borders with Russia, right near this defensive line. In fact, it's the development of these fortifications that helps explain headlines like these.
Baltics and Poland announce planned withdrawal from landmine treaty. Lithuania's parliament approves exit from landmines treaty amid Russia threat.
The latest country to withdraw from the anti-landmine treaty was Lithuania, with its parliament approving the move just a few weeks ago. And that is yet another sign that the Baltic border fortification effort is deadly serious. It's not just for show. Now, remember earlier when we mentioned that Estonia is at a geographic disadvantage when it comes to defending against a Russian attack? Well, there's a civil project that could partially change that. Yes, you heard that right. Civil. Although some people consider it to have both civilian and military uses. Any guesses what we're talking about? Well, take a look at this.
Rail Baltica plays a crucial role in enhancing military mobility across the Baltics.
I'm talking about Rail Baltica, the largest railway project in the history of the Baltic states, which has now also become a strategic geopolitical necessity. This 870-kilometer high-speed rail line will connect the 3 Baltic states with Poland, and from there to the rest of Europe. And in the future, it could even link them to Finland via an underwater tunnel beneath the Baltic Sea. The main goal is to support the integration of these countries into European transport networks and improve the mobility of both people and goods. However, these days, Rail Baltica is taking on a whole new level of importance as a piece of strategic military infrastructure. You see, Rail Baltica is also designed to carry heavy military equipment like tanks and armored vehicles, which are difficult and slow to move by road. In fact, it will be able to transport an entire military unit in a single train, replacing a vulnerable 7-kilometer long military convoy on the road with a 40-wagon train. And in the event of armed conflict, it could evacuate up to 143,000 people from the Baltic capitals to Poland in just one day.
The Rail Baltica infrastructure is being planned and designed to meet the requirements necessary for national defense, from cargo dimensions and loads to enhanced security requirements at stations. Several strategically important objects are also being supported by EU military mobility funds.
As you can imagine, this infrastructure has become absolutely crucial for the Baltic states. It's no longer just about mobility, it's about closing one of the biggest security gaps these 3 small countries face: their relative isolation from the rest of Europe by land. And listen, there's still one last very important piece we haven't talked about yet. Remember that small Estonian city we mentioned at the start, Narva? Well, right now, civilians are being trained there to prepare for a potential Russian invasion. In fact, in the face of a growing threat, more and more people are joining the Estonian Defense League, a volunteer paramilitary organization that would support the armed forces from the rear if war broke out. And that's not all. This past April, Estonia announced the construction of a new military base in Narva for the Estonian Defense Forces. At first, it will host around 200 to 250 rotating personnel, but it's very likely that it'll gradually expand. And as is often the case around there, they'll do it quietly.
People have asked why the EDF isn't already in Narva. Through the Defense League, we're present there, but the plan is to permanently station units in Narva to send a strong signal to residents that the Estonian state is firmly present. They would be on combat readiness duty for a period, then return to either Jovi or Tapa to resume their regular training.
Up until now, Estonian forces didn't have a permanent base in Narva, and that had become a growing concern in Tallinn. So this is a clear signal that this part of Estonia needs to be far more militarily prepared than it has been so far. And if all this already sounds like a lot, especially for such a small country, well, it's not even everything. Take a look at what just wrapped up a few days ago.
Estonia to conduct large-scale military drills with UK-France.
That's right, Estonia has just hosted troops from over 10 allied countries this month, including France, the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. The Brits, for example, sent more than 1,500 soldiers from their 4th Army Brigade, but those 1,500 troops are just a fraction of the 16,000 Estonian and allied personnel who took part in the biggest military exercise of the year in the country, Hedgehog 2025. And the name says it all. Estonia wants to become a defensive porcupine, capable of inflicting maximum damage on anyone who tries to poke it. To give you an idea, in this exercise, alongside Estonia's regular armed forces and NATO allies, there's another group involved as well. A group that actually has more members than Estonia's professional defense forces, which number just under 8,000. We're talking about the Estonian Defense League. And yeah, you might be wondering, what the heck is that? Well, the Estonian Defense League is a kind of paramilitary force made up entirely of volunteers operating under the Ministry of Defense.
Today, this force already has around 18,000 members, and that number jumps to 29,000 if you count affiliated organizations. These are people who not only cooperate with the army, but are almost fully integrated into it. True, the Defense League doesn't handle missiles or advanced weapons systems, but they do receive ground military training aimed at complementing the professional army. Their role focuses on territorial defense, especially in the rear lines in case of war, logistics, and supporting local security efforts.
And this training is now being extended to cities like Narva itself. After all, the belief in Estonia is that if Russia were ever to attack, this would likely be the entry point, Narva. So as you can see, Estonia is shaping up to be a prime candidate as Russia's next target once the war in Ukraine is over. What might seem like a peaceful border today, with 2 picturesque castles, a quiet river, and beautiful natural surroundings, could actually become Europe's next major flashpoint. In Estonia, just like in its Baltic neighbors, preparations for a post-Ukraine scenario are already well underway. And that should make one thing crystal clear. If Putin isn't stopped in Ukraine, if the war ends with a so-called peace deal that the dictator can spin as a victory, then the situation in the coming years will only get worse. From Western Europe, from the comfort of Spain, France, or Italy, this may all sound like an overreaction, but the reality here in this part of Europe is radically different. People are already living as if anything could happen. Of course, let's hope none of it comes to pass. But everything will depend on how the war in Ukraine ends, the kind of agreement that comes out of future peace talks, and whether Europe remains united and committed to defending every last centimetre of its territory, no matter how remote. But while we wait, the questions are for you. What do you think is the best way to deter a potential Russian attack on Finland or the Baltic states? Should the EU play a bigger role in covering defense costs for the member states that border Russia or Belarus? Drop your thoughts down below in the comments and let's get the conversation started. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a like and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already. And as always, thanks for watching. Take care. See you next time.